Good evening, everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Monday Travel Therapy Mentor live video. Tonight we're going to be talking about our experience with travel therapy in an RV, why we recently chose to get rid of our RV to sell it, and some of the pros and cons of traveling in an RV versus finding short-term housing. Originally, my very first website, Fifth Wheel PT, obviously that was created, the title was primarily about traveling in the RV, and that was very much like part of our identity for a while. So we want to talk a little bit about how that changed over time and some of the reasons behind the decisions that we made. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll jump into the topic. I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups.
Hey everybody, thank y'all for joining us. My name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. Many of you guys may have joined in for our videos in the past, but in case you're new to our page and our videos, just give you a little background about us before we dive into tonight's topic while Jared is getting our video shared to some other groups. So we've been travel PTs for about 5 years now. And as Jared said, we have a personal blog that's called fifthwheelpt.com. And as we alluded to, the name of that original blog came from the fact that we lived in a camper, in a fifth wheel camper for a while. During our travel therapy journey. We also, in the past about a year and a half ago, we started a new website which is called Travel Therapy Mentor, where we educate and mentor other therapists and students who want to become traveling therapists, as well as current travel therapists who need advice. So each week we try to do a video on different topics related to travel therapy to bring you guys some education and information about various things that have to pertain to being a traveling therapist. So we've talked a little bit about housing in the past. If you've watched any of our other videos, we've talked a little bit about this in the past. If you are a regular follower of ours, you know that we recently sold our fifth wheel and our truck, and we've gotten a lot of questions about that. We actually also recently bought a house. So a lot of people kind of want to know, are you done traveling? Why aren't you doing the RV anymore? And a lot of people come to us asking, is RVing a good idea? Especially if they follow our blog, our Fifth Wheel PT blog. They say, hey, that's really cool that you travel in an RV. Is that a good idea? Should I do that too? My significant other and I are thinking about doing travel in an RV. Is that a good idea? So tonight we'll just kind of dive into our experience with it, some of the pros and cons that we learned over time. Again, we've kind of touched on this topic before, but now that it's all over with, that's in our past, it's part of our story, we'll just kind of share a little bit of the insight of our experience, kind of looking back on it. So Jared is, again, just getting our video shared in a couple more groups so that more people can join on with us live. I do see that quite a few of you are already on live with us. If you are watching live, please say hi in the comments. Just give us a little wave, tell us who you are. Are you a current traveler? Are you a student that's maybe thinking about traveling? Just let us know. And also if you're watching later on the replay, as I know many of you guys do, just let us know that you watched us on the replay. Give us a little thumbs up, we appreciate it. Hey Kara, hey Mariah, Kelsey, Naya, thank y'all for joining tonight. All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit about just kind of our history and the choice to get an RV, and then we'll talk about the choice to sell it.
Yeah, hey Kara. So we started traveling 5 years ago, like Whitney said. We bought the RV, or our fifth wheel, probably about 6 months into our travel therapy careers. We saved up enough money for the first 2 contracts that we took to pay cash for a camper and a truck, and we thought that was gonna be a great thing. So then we didn't have to find short-term housing anymore. We knew from talking to other travelers and from some of our own research that trying to find short-term housing can be very difficult, especially for 2 people. So an RV seems like the obvious solution to that. And there was some good and some bad, and that's definitely why we want to talk about the pros and cons of it, because I think a lot of times, especially with the whole tiny house movement and things like that, it can kind of be romanticized a little bit, where people think that it's going to be so wonderful, and some parts are great, but there's also some downsides. So we traveled in that RV for about 2.5 years, on and off, mostly consecutively, back-to-back contracts. But we did, near the end of having the RV, we had it for about 4 years. Near the end of having it, it was in storage a lot because we weren't traveling as much. We were doing international travel, just exploring the world, so we couldn't really take the RV for that. So it got to a point where we were keeping it in storage a lot more than we were actually using it. But we did use it consecutively for about 2 to 2.5 years.
Yep. So back when we originally thought it was a great idea, and we decided actually when we were students that we wanted to do the RV life. And you know, a lot of you guys that are watching could be in that planning, contemplating stage 2, thinking, hey, this sounds like a good idea. Maybe you're a current traveler who is sick of doing short-term housing and you think it'd be kind of cool. Maybe you're a student or somebody who's planning to travel, that you've been following other people's van stories and RV stories and things like that, or our story. So we kind of want to talk about just like why we thought it was a good idea, what our motivation was, and then kind of just our experience throughout. So I would say the first time we learned about RVing for a travel healthcare provider was when I was a student. I had at one of my clinicals, I had a patient who had done the RV life, and he said that throughout RVing, he had met a lot of traveling nurses that did the RV thing at the campgrounds that he would stay at. And that's what first gave us the idea. And initially, I was not for it at all. Like, I had no background in camping, no desire to do tiny living. This was like 2014 or so.
Yeah, 2013 or 14.
That wasn't really, like, I don't think, like, the tiny house movement was really in full swing then. I was not interested in that in any way. I just happened to tell Jared that day after my clinical, after work that day, I said, hey, my patient mentioned this thing, but like, that sounds weird. Like, I'm not into that. And Jared was like, you know, that might actually be a good idea. Because when we had been talking about travel therapy, the kind of the logistics seemed a little bit daunting, like the packing and the moving. I'm definitely an overpacker, or at least I was. Somebody who packs way too much for just like a short 1-week vacation, you know, the giant rolling suitcase and the carry-on and all that good stuff. So I thought that it would be challenging and it would probably cause us a lot of headache to try to move every 3 months and pack the car and move into a new apartment. So it sort of started to catch on, the idea with us.
Yeah. Hey, George. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Michael. So for me, like Whitney said, I was definitely more into it than she was in the beginning, primarily because of the finances. So Whitney's worried about space and things like that. I'm worried about saving money as much as possible. In my mind, I looked up the price of RV sites and I was like, hey, I know that short-term housing is pretty expensive. These RV sites are really cheap. So, you know, maybe we could buy an RV, we could use it for 4 or 5 years and then sell it for about what we bought it for. And then that would be wonderful because we're just saving money every assignment on housing costs. In a lot of cases, an RV site is $500 or $600 less per month than short-term housing would be in that same area. So in my mind, I was like, okay, we'll buy it, we'll use it for all this time, we'll sell it, maybe for slight depreciation, we'll save a lot of money, it'll be a great idea. So yeah, I was coming at it more from the financial point of view. So
kind of just to talk about, that's where we were, that's where our thoughts were, and then what actually happened. Well, for the most part, it actually did work out pretty well for us financially. We did find that we were able to find pretty cheap campsites. It actually helped it make it a lot easier to move from place to place. Like, we used to finish a job on a Friday and pack up the camper on Saturday and Sunday and move on Saturday and Sunday and be at our new assignment ready to go on Monday. You didn't have to set up utilities and all that stuff when you got there. It made finding contracts in some ways easier in terms of like not knowing whether you were gonna have a place to stay, because we would actually always look up if there was a contract offered to us, a potential position. We would look up way ahead of time before we even did the job interview to see if there were gonna be RV sites there, and I would even call and find out if they were gonna have openings for long-term spots. So we would usually already have all that well established and arranged. So in a lot of ways, it did help us financially and it did help us with our moves. But what we didn't know, I think a big part of it, we'll kind of talk more about the financial aspect and where we actually ended up coming out in the end, but just logistically, we didn't realize how many repairs, how much maintenance, kind of all the little things that can break and the headaches that go into it.
Yeah, and some of that is definitely our fault. We rushed into the purchase way more than we should have. We were very excited. Once we had become sold on the idea of getting a camper and a truck, not finding short-term housing anymore, we became very focused on just getting that as soon as possible. So as soon as we had enough money saved, we were on the hunt trying to find something, and it turned out that there was not a whole lot available in the area that we were, so we were driving on the weekends like 3 hours to look at campers. And basically we got sick of looking, we wanted to get something, and I think we probably didn't do as much research. If we had put in more work up front, we probably would have come out a little better, but the camper and the truck that we ended up getting were not the best, and I think they ended up having a lot more issues than we anticipated.
Yeah, so we definitely went into it kind of naive. we always recommend when we're talking about the financial side of it, the way you come out really ahead financially is by buying a used camper and a used truck or a used motorhome combination, however you decide to do it. Because if you buy it new, it's just like a new car. It's going to be so expensive. You're going to lose, it's going to depreciate a lot as soon as you drive it off the lot. So you really come out ahead when you can buy it cheap and sell it for roughly the same amount or a little bit less than you bought it for. Well, we did okay on the cost. We had budgeted maybe like $40,000 for the camper and the truck. And we were able to find a truck and a camper that fit that budget. But what we didn't really know is, I'll start talking about the truck first. So we ended up with a Ford F-250 diesel, and it was a 2005. So we didn't know anything about diesel trucks, but kind of in our research, we came upon the fact that it might be better to get a diesel to pull a big trailer that's heavy.
We found that pretty much the campers we were looking at, we wanted to get a big fifth wheel, and basically the tow rating it would have been really pushing it to get a gas-powered truck to pull the camper with.
But we didn't know much about diesels. So we ended up just kind of like, if you're shopping for a used car, you look at kind of like the year and the number of miles on it, and if it looks like it's in good condition, and if the seller says it's in good condition. So we thought, well, this seems like a good price to number of miles to things wrong with it ratio. We had no idea. So we weren't really like truck people. So we ended up getting a truck that apparently, if you are a truck person, this year, like there's a range of years that Ford put out these diesel engines that had a lot of problems. So that just caused us a lot of problems up front because we just weren't truck people and we had no idea. But then after that, every diesel mechanic we took it to was like, oh, you had the 6.0 engine. Oh gosh. And we're like, yeah, oh gosh, we had no idea. So we ended up having all these problems with like the turbo and the fuel injectors and like all kinds of words I didn't know 5 years ago. So that caused us significant headaches, lots of breakdowns, using the towing option on my Geico insurance way too many times.
Yeah, and in addition to all the issues that we had, the headache that went along with, not even just headache, but like worry, nonstop worry for us when we were doing any move. I would worry about, what if it breaks down? What if I can't back it in? What if we get to a spot on the road where I can't go around, or like all these little things that just weighed on my mind.
Well, one time we broke down, the truck broke down and we had the camper attached to it, and we were like, how do you get a truck towed that has a camper attached to it? Do you just leave the camper on the side of the road? You don't know.
And luckily, I know nothing about fixing any vehicles at all, but luckily, this was the only possible repair I could have done myself, and we ended up going to an auto parts store. I fixed it myself, but otherwise, that would have been a nightmare.
It would have been a nightmare. So that was kind of our story with the truck. We had a lot of problems with that. As you can imagine, if you've ever had to get repairs done on a vehicle, then you have to borrow somebody else's car or rent a car or deal with only having one car, and we dealt with that way too many times. There were just a lot of struggles and a lot of headaches that we didn't anticipate, and it ruined a lot of good times for us because we were like traveling, and I'll talk about this with the camper too. We were traveling to have fun on the weekends. We wanted to be in our new place, in our new city, and explore on the weekends. We didn't want to be spending our weekends doing maintenance on trucks and campers. That just wasn't us. And so that caused us a lot of headache.
Yeah. And real quick, let's touch back on the financial aspect. Like I said, we thought that we'd come out way ahead financially. And the savings comes from the monthly, the amount you save monthly versus a short-term housing. So usually, like I said, probably somewhere between $400 and $600 a month you might save. The downside is the upfront costs, obviously. So you have to buy the truck, buy the camper, or you have payments on the truck and camper, which is obviously expensive. So the upfront costs of the truck, the camper, depreciation costs, repair costs, obviously gas costs. So pulling the camper with the diesel truck, our fifth wheel, we would get about 6 miles a gallon. So any significant distance was expensive. It would be $300 or $400 to pull it for 10 or 12 hours. So it's expensive. And then there's personal property taxes, what else? Insurance costs, those kind of things. So all of that factors in. And that's a lot of things that you forget about. We didn't realize how much the depreciation would actually be and how much repairs would actually cost. So like I said, I assumed that we'd be able to buy it, keep it for a few years, sell it for about what we paid for it. I've always done that with cars in my life. I usually buy something, drive it for a couple of years, and sell it for about what I paid for it, used cars. I assumed that a truck and the camper would be the same. Turned out not to be the case. So that is partially our fault because, like I said, we didn't do enough research up front there are probably a lot of travelers or a lot of RV truck people that are able to do that. We just didn't have the knowledge to do it. So we lost quite a bit more on depreciation than I assumed, and that depreciation and repair cost really offset our monthly savings.
Yeah, so we'll get into talking about kind of the end result when we end up selling it, but...
Hey Erin, thanks for joining. Miss you too.
Hey Megan, hey Lauren. Yeah, if you guys are watching, if y'all wouldn't mind just saying hi, giving us a thumbs up, let us know you're listening. Let us know if you are a current RV person, if you're somebody, I know Megan and her husband are just started their RV life, and you know, let us know if you're thinking about the RV life. Let us know if you have any questions. So we kind of talked about our Ford F-250 diesel truck that we had a lot of problems with. So we also ended up having a lot of problems, a lot of maintenance, and a lot of repairs that we were not anticipating with our camper. So we ended up buying an 09 Coachman Chaparral fifth wheel. The fifth wheel was pretty spacious as far as like a lot of the ones we had looked at. So it had 2 slide outs. We really liked the layout of it. We had been in a lot of other layouts. We'd kind of gone to some RV shows, some RV dealerships, and we'd walked in a bunch, and we were just really pleased with the aesthetics, with the layout. It fit our budget. We were so excited about it that I think we failed to look at a lot of the things that were probably wrong with it. We were first-time RV buyers. We had no history. We had no family or friend to come and take a look at it with us. So before we kind of talk about the problems we have with it, my advice to you guys up front is, like, if you're looking at buying a camper, find somebody who knows what they're looking for, knows what to ask, knows what to look for. You can even, I think you can hire somebody to go and do like an inspection on it before you purchase it.
Yeah, if you get very serious about something, like our camper cost, I think it was $16,000 we paid for it used. It was 6 or 7 years old. Yeah, if we could go back, I would have probably paid someone in the area a couple $100, like an RV technician or something, to come look at it. Because if they had, they probably would have given us a lot of insight. So at least we would have gone into it more prepared for things that might go wrong. But yeah, we went into it. We were like, wow, this is exactly what we wanted. It's got all the things we want, but that does not account for structural or water damage or any of that we didn't really know to check for, or even if we knew to check for it, we didn't know how to check for it.
Yeah. So we ended up, the biggest problem with ours was we had some water damage that we had no idea what to even look for. At one point, I think we had actually already maybe signed the papers, and it was the day we were picking it up or something. We happened to notice that there was some wood that looked like it was fraying when you were outside the unit and the slide outs were out. And you could see basically the floor underneath the RV from the outside. The wood looked like it was fraying a little bit. So I think we'd already bought it even, but the salesman was out there with us just kind of doing a walkthrough, and we pointed it out and we said, hey, what about this wood that looks like it's like fraying a little bit? And he was like, oh, that's fine. It's just cosmetic. He assured us it was fine. In our opinion, he was the expert. So it was a few months later.
Note to self, if you buy from a dealership, don't listen to the salesman. They just want to sell it.
Yeah, salesmen are going to tell you what you want to hear, right? So turns out was not just cosmetic, very structural. So at one point we basically realized, like, inside the camper where you're at the floor and the floor meets the wall, that you could basically see daylight coming through. There was a crack in between where the floor was basically sagging and making an opening, which it caused all kinds of problems. Like, for one, it could fall through, bugs, water, air, anything can get in that's not supposed to get in. So obviously there was significant water damage on the floor of both slide outs. So we kind of got screwed. This led to a lot of various repairs kind of down the line that we had to, some of them we got the RV dealership, thank God, to pay for. Some of them we had to pay for ourselves. Some of them led to significant problems down the line with further water damage and further structural problems. So it was just a nightmare.
Yeah, we had a lot of issues with it. Another thing, like, this doesn't bother Whitney as much, but like I said, I worry about things all the time. So knowing that there was that water damage and getting all that repaired, I worried about it all the time. In addition to that, though, one of the slide outs in the bedroom is where we slept at night. So knowing that I don't know about the structural integrity of the area underneath the bed worried me pretty much every night that we ever lived in it. So that alone, just waking up and worrying that I'm gonna fall out of the camper through the slide out was. It was a hassle.
It was a hot mess. So those were some of the, like, primary, like, structural, like, real problems that we had. Like I said, we kind of just didn't anticipate the amount of work we were going to have to put in, the amount of time. It brings us back to like when people talk about buying boats. Like there's an old saying, like when you buy a boat, you either need to have a lot of money, a lot of time, or like a lot of know-how or something, like a lot of skill, like 1 to 2 of those 3 things to be able to maintain your boat. It's exactly the same with the RV. You either need to be able to pay a bunch of money to pay somebody else to do it for you, or you need to have like a lot of time and knowledge and skills to fix things. And we just weren't really Mr. and Mrs. Fix-It ourselves, and we didn't really want to be. Like there's a lot of people who you might be watching this and you might be like, oh, like I know, for example, Megan and Ryan, like they seem to be super handy. Megan seems to be, our friends that are watching, from my observations of y'all's RV overhaul, like you seem to enjoy that HGTV life, and he seems to have like a lot of skills with like spending time on the weekends ripping things out and repairing things and doing all that stuff. That's just not really us, and we didn't really want to spend our time doing that. We wanted to spend our time on the weekends exploring and going and doing things.
Yeah.
So just overall, that was a hassle for us personally. So you have to know like what you're getting into, and if you're that type of person. Like there's some people that go into doing travel therapy in an RV and they've already been RV people. Like maybe you already owned one, or you grew up RVing as a kid. So none of this might not matter to you.
Yeah, and a lot of the decision whether or not to travel in an RV or a camper, I think depends on your reason for doing so. Like I said, my primary reason was I thought we would save a lot of money on the monthly expenses. In reality, that turned out to not be so much the case. Like Whitney said, if you're going to go that route, it's almost, to save money, you almost have to buy used, because a new RV and a new truck depreciate so quickly. So like we mentioned, our budget was $40,000 between the two, and I think we spent a little under that. Whereas if you buy a new truck and a new camper, you can easily spend $100,000 or more, and that's going to depreciate massively if you keep it for 4 or 5 years. You might only be able to sell that $100,000 truck and camper for $50,000 at the end of that. So there's not enough that you can save in monthly cost to offset that depreciation. So you have to buy used, in my opinion, if you're doing it financially, for the financial benefit. But if you buy used, you have to make sure that, do your research and make sure that that model's good and that the integrity of the camper is good.
And even if you do all that research, you just have to kind of know what you're signing up for. You have to realize that like some stuff is going to break. It's kind of like owning a house, but it's a house on wheels. So probably more likely some little thing is going to break, and probably more likely that it's going to be more difficult to fix, because you can't just go to Lowe's and like do the exact same thing that you would do to a house. And you can't just go to somebody, they don't always know, like you don't have the same people that are like, the guy at Lowe's like was like, oh, home repair, I get this, but like he might not know anything about RVs. So you might have to do additional research. You might have to find somebody who knows more about it. You might have to find particular parts that go for an RV. So it's just a lot more hassle.
Yeah, and finding a technician that will come out is difficult. And you might not think, and expensive. And you might not think that's a big deal because you could just take it somewhere. But the issue is when you're traveling in it, especially if you're doing like us and trying to work back-to-back contracts, you can't just take it and drop it off somewhere for 2 weeks, because that's your house. You know, you'd have to get a hotel room. You'd have to move everything out. It's a big deal to move in and out of it. It's not just a real quick process. So you almost have to have a mobile technician come out if you have some big issue. And that, it's costly, and it can be hard to find someone that is good.
Yeah. On top of that, there's just kind of some lifestyle stuff to consider. So just the fact of living at campgrounds. I saw that Megan said something about going to the laundromat. So most RVs don't have washer dryer, and then that's pretty normal. Some of them do, but even if they do, they're really tiny. So most of the time you're either gonna have to carry your laundry out to the car and take it to a laundromat, or carry it out to, if they have an on-site laundromat. You have to be very acutely aware of the weather situation. I mean, is it gonna be cold? Are your water lines gonna freeze? That happened to us so many times where our water lines froze, and we just didn't, in the early days especially, we really didn't realize, like, if it's getting anywhere near freezing, you need to either drip the water or fill your tanks and take your water hose in. So we had a lot of problems with freezing. We had some problems with moisture control as well. We had some mold. I had like this awful experience where I had stored some shoes in a cabinet that were like the other season of shoes, like summer shoes or something like that. And I had not looked in that cabinet for months, and then I opened the cabinet, and then all my shoes and my belts and everything had mold on them, because I guess just the difference in temperature inside and outside, and us running the heat and whatnot. And that was like, it was a closet that touched an exterior wall, and I had no idea about moisture absorbers. FYI, I learned about moisture absorbers, damp rid, if you're going to be an RV owner.
Yeah, the moisture is a big issue. The windows, the gradient in temperatures from outside and inside, especially in the winter when it's warm inside and cold outside, you get a lot of moisture on the inside of the windows, and that moisture can cause a lot of problems. So
there's just a lot to learn and a lot to think about. So I think we went into it just thinking it was going to be easier, it was going to be a better financial move, and in some regards it was, but I think we definitely didn't understand the lifestyle that much. So I think you need to go into it understanding what you're getting into, accepting that lifestyle, accepting that you're going to have to spend a couple weekends a year, or 1 weekend a month or so doing some regular routine maintenance, like going up on the roof and checking things, making sure your tires are maintained. You should cover your tires, but you never did.
You should seal every opening on the RV probably once a year, caulk around all the openings, caulk around the roof around all the openings up there, which we did occasionally, but that is also time consuming.
Yeah. So kind of with all of this said, just sort of leading up to what we ended up doing, we lived in it pretty much full time for like 2.5 years. By that time, we were a little bit over it. Like we were already sort of thinking like, we could be done with this like soon. So it was especially, I think, when we finally decided that we were going to be going out of the country for our first like big international trip, which was about our like 3rd year of traveling. We decided we were going to take like 5 or 6 months off and travel internationally. And it was really at that time we were a little bit over it, and we knew we were going to be out of the country for like 5 or 6 months. So we were like, this would be a good time to just sell it. And then when we get back, just kind of maybe do something new. So you want to kind of talk through like when we decided to sell it to when we actually did sell it?
Yeah, so that was 2018, probably the middle of 2018 when we thought, okay, it would be great if we could sell it now. Well, the problem was we had issues that no one would want to buy it in that condition. So we needed to have repairs done, and this was just pretty much a massive drama of about 1.5 years of trying to get all the things repaired. Camping World, we had a ton of issues with 2 different Camping Worlds, with them doing the right repairs, making sure everything was actually fixed before we picked it up.
Communication.
It was basically a 1.5 year process of getting everything repaired to be able to sell it, and then we finally did sell it a couple months ago.
Yeah, so part of the problem was we dropped it off to we thought that Camping World would do the repairs and then put it on consignment and sell it for us while we were out of the country. So we were hoping that this would all transpire and it would be done. Well, there was just like, the ball just kept getting dropped over and over and over again, and they just basically like forgot about it and left it sitting on their lot. And then I kept calling, and we're out of the country, we're like in Asia, and I'm trying to make international calls to Camping World to say like, okay, is it done? Like, did you put it on consignment? I don't see it on the website yet. And the ball just kept getting dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. And finally, we got back from Asia, and they had not done what they said they were going to do.
And then it's winter again, and no one wants to buy a camper in the winter. So it was, yeah.
It was a drama. So then we brought it back, and I think we took it to a different Camping World, and then kind of the same thing happened. And then I don't even remember. We went out of the country again because we do that now. We go out of the country a lot, and then it still wasn't sold. And then we ended up getting back from being out of the country there. And at that point, we still owned it, and they had finally done the repairs. And they said, you know what, we're not going to be able to consign it for you because it's too old. Because it was an 2009. At this point, it was like 2019. And they were like, it's too old and it has, some other problems, and we're just not going to be able to consign it for you. So we just kind of washed our hands of Camping World at that point and said, okay, we'll just try to sell it ourselves. But then we were getting ready to start a new travel assignment. So we were like, you know what, we still own a camper. Let's just live in it one more time. So we lived in it one more time, this past assignment in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And we got pretty lucky at that point. We were in an area of North Carolina where RVing is very typical. Not only do people use RVs for recreational vehicles, but a lot of people park campers at lakes and national parks and stuff like that. Not national parks, but parks to keep there as like a second home, or like a lake house or whatever. It's a very common thing there. So we were able to actually have a pretty good success selling it ourselves to someone who wanted to do that, who wanted to park it long-term at a lake, which we think it was perfect for that because it wasn't in the best condition. Yes, it was 10 years old at that point. It had a lot of problems and water damage and stuff like that. And so we thought like, oh gosh, we feel kind of bad if somebody buys this and tries to take it across the country and it's not in great condition, but the people who ended up buying it just wanted to park it, leave it, and it was just going to stay there.
Yeah, they got a good deal on it. We had done all the repairs. Hopefully it's in pretty decent condition now to just sit in one spot. So they should be in pretty good shape, and
Yeah.
we were done with it, which we were happy about.
And we ended up taking a significant loss on it financially in the end. We just kind of like, by the time it was like a year and a half of trying to sell it, we originally thought, oh, we'll be able to sell it. We bought it for 16. We'll be able to sell it for 12 or 14 maybe. That quickly got slashed. And then it was like maybe 11, maybe 9, you know. So we just kind of kept bringing the price down, and we were like, you know what, at this point, just take it. Like, will you give us or we'll give you $5 to take it. So we didn't sell it for that much, but at that point.
Financially, we pretty much, it was about 50% that we lost in depreciation between the truck and the camper. So that is a lot of money for about 4 years, and that's definitely not something that I was anticipating. And I think, like I said, I thought we'd save a lot of money monthly. We did. We lost a lot more in depreciation and repairs than I thought. I think we probably about broke even, but I would really have to sit down and go through all the repairs and everything to come up with it. But it was definitely not the financial panacea, I guess, that I was thinking it would be. It turned out to not be as great. But so we're going to go through, just after all that, we're going to go through real quick like a list of the pros and cons of traveling in a camper versus traveling short-term housing.
Yeah.
But real quick, if you guys could like this video, comment below, let us know where you're at in your travel journey. If you're interested in traveling in an RV, or you're currently traveling in an RV, let us know.
And we have a few comments we'll read through here in a minute, but I think overall, I mean, like Jared said, it didn't end up being as financially worth it as we thought, and it didn't end up being as easy breezy as we thought either. But I don't regret that we did it.
No, I don't either. I think we did break even financially. There were some benefits, which we'll talk about. If we could go back now, I think I would do it again. If we were starting over, I think I would have done more research and not jumped so quickly into a purchase. But I do think for the situation we were in back then, where we were planning to travel nonstop, it served us pretty well. Mm-hmm. And it would have been way better if I didn't worry about things so much.
Yeah, and I mean, it was an adventure. It was an experience, something we'll never forget. We learned a lot about RVing in that whole life, and we were part of that community for a little while, and it was neat. It was fun. It did make it easier to move sometimes, so parts of it we really liked, parts of it we didn't. Like I said, we were just kind of at a point where we were just sort of over it, and we were also, I think the biggest reason why we ended up selling it more or less was just because we were going to be taking so much more time off and not traveling. So it ended up being in storage, and by in storage I mean at Camping World, and then also in storage just 50% of the year. So that just didn't seem worth it to us. So we were kind of at a point where we were just ready to make a transition. But you know, that was just sort of our reason. A lot of people were like, oh, like, why did you stop RVing? It just seemed right for us at that point in our timeline. But again, we'll kind of go through some of the just general pros and cons if you're considering getting an RV.
All right, so you want to read them off, and I'll just like elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, so the first pro that I had written down to RVing was it's sometimes cheaper.
Yeah, like we talked about, monthly costs are definitely less, but you have to consider how much of that is going to be offset by depreciation, all the other costs I mentioned. Like I said, even things like personal property tax, gas, all those things have to be considered.
Okay, the next pro is that there's generally less problems with packing and moving.
That is very true. That is a big benefit that I think was the biggest benefit to RVing for us. We could pretty much pack the entire RV, get everything ready to move in probably about 3 or 4 hours, versus if we were doing short-term housing, it would take a lot longer than that. And then when we got to the new site, we could unpack in probably an hour to 2 hours, get everything ready, and we're ready to go. And the moving process was not a big deal. Hooking the truck up, unhooking it, going, as long as it was a fairly easy move, it was not a big deal.
Yeah. The next pro is that you always have your own home.
That was a big benefit for us. So basically what that means is we always have the same couch, we always have the same kitchen setup, we always have everything where we know it is, we have the same bed, shower, bathroom, everything's the same. Whereas with short-term housing, that's not the case. You're getting used to a new whole environment every time you move. Not only your new housing environment, but a new city, new clinic, new everything. So having some consistency there was really nice.
Yep. The next benefit is sometimes it's really good for people with pets.
Yeah, so that is a situation. If you're a travel couple with pets, 1 or 2 dogs or something like that.
Or not necessarily even a couple, but...
Yeah, even an individual, I guess. short-term housing is more expensive with pets. And it can be not only more expensive, but harder to find. And I think that is a situation where you might have some real utility in traveling in an RV, because it'll be easier to find somewhere and it'll be cheaper for you.
Yeah, and I did put that it is sometimes better for couples than it is for an individual.
Yeah, and that's really has to do with you're able to split that depreciation cost, the repair costs, all that stuff. It doesn't seem so daunting to have a big repair bill when it's split between two people.
And it's a little easier, I think, to have a second person when you're thinking about like loading up a trailer and hauling it and all that stuff.
Especially backing it when you get to a new place, and if you have to back it in, doing it by yourself is hard.
Yeah. The next pro is that it makes it easier to find housing in some cases.
Yeah, like when you mentioned earlier with that, if we found an assignment location, we would just quickly Google RV parks in near wherever, whatever the city was. And within probably 15 minutes, we would know whether or not we could likely have a spot in that area. And that would make us decide whether or not we even wanted to submit for that job. And if there was no RV parks or there was no vacancies, we would just pass on the job. Whereas with short-term housing, you might have to call around for several hours. One situation, we called around for about 12 hours before we found a short-term housing place that would work for us.
And the last pro that I've written down is that it can be a fun lifestyle and community.
Yeah, so every campground, this is an interesting thing. When we first started and I told people that we wanted to travel in an RV, I had some people, one guy that I talked to in particular was a current traveler at the time, and he said, I wouldn't do that. I would never want to stay in trailer parks. And I was like, I wonder if, it will actually be like dangerous doing this or whatever. And we had some doubts about that. Not only was it not that way, it was completely the opposite of that. Almost every campground we stayed at, every one that except one that I can think of, I would have felt fine leaving the door unlocked at the campground. You have mostly people that are there short term, that are usually fairly wealthy, a lot of times older people that are very nice and they're laid back. They're usually vacationing, so they're not like stressed out. It was a really great environment, and a lot of the campgrounds have things like pools and mini golf and basketball courts, and so there's kind of a community around the campgrounds, and we enjoyed that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do stay at some where people live there long term, and maybe they have lower income and they live in a camper that's kind of there more permanent. But still, we found everyone to be very kind, very helpful. We definitely even had people at the campgrounds like help offer us to help back indoor spots. I had a lady loan me like a dirt buster type, or like a thing that sucks up water. One time when our toilet overflowed, we've had people come over and help us wire things and fix things and all kinds of stuff. And we met a lot of nice people. So it was really, it was a fun lifestyle, and it was really unique. And then you kind of can share a community, nationwide. If you meet somebody, you're like, oh wow, I lived in an RV and you lived in an RV too. That's really cool. Yeah. So it's definitely, there's a lot of pros. So next, let's talk a little bit about the cons. We'll just kind of do a quick recap. We talked a lot about the cons, I think, already. So the first con is repairs and maintenance. Yeah,
for sure. And this is obviously going to depend on what you buy, how old it is, how good the model of camper, things like that. And also the truck. Don't forget about repairs for the truck. Actually, the truck ended up costing us more in repairs than the fifth wheel did, and I would have never anticipated that. So yeah, repairs and maintenance can be a lot more expensive and time consuming than you anticipate, depending on your situation.
Yeah, and that's if you choose a truck and trailer combo. I can't even imagine if you choose a motorhome, then you also have to deal with like the innards of the motorhome drivetrain, the engine, the transmission, and everything that has to do with the motorhome that's also attached to your house. So lots of maintenance and repairs. Okay. The cons sometimes can be finding campgrounds, for example, near a city. It can limit where you have to go, or sometimes we found it can be limiting because of seasonal, like a lot of people, for example, like in Arizona, you can tell them a little bit about Arizona, the seasonal problems and the 50+ problems.
Yeah, some campgrounds only allow people above a certain age because they want just certain clientele in there. Some campgrounds close for the winter, especially in the north. So if you're going to be there into the fall and maybe into the beginning of winter, you might run into a situation where the campground would close before your contract's over, which is awful. There is also, basically, campgrounds are great for rural assignments, rural areas, but it would be awful to take a job in a city and have to commute from outside of the city into the city, staying in a campground out there. Because not only would it be more expensive, but they're harder to find, and I don't think that would be a good situation. So it depends on the type of traveler you are. If you want to go to a bunch of cities, then I don't think a camper is for you. If you want to go to rural areas or, places that are a little smaller, then, that would be a lot better situation.
Yeah, it just depends. So sometimes it really did limit us from going near cities, which we didn't care about because we didn't necessarily want to be in cities anyway. But even some places that you think are going to have RV sites, and Google says there's RV sites, sometimes there are areas where snowbirds go, like in Arizona or Florida, where they actually limit the campground to 50 or 55 plus because it's only supposed to be for like retirees. And some places like in Arizona, they rent out months in advance because people come there for half the year and bring their RV. So they're like rented out, fully booked out in these vacation or snowbird areas. So that can be a negative to finding campgrounds sometimes.
Yep.
Okay, the next one, a con would be weather-related problems.
Yeah, and this is more to do with, we talked about the water hose freezing. That's a big downside. Sometimes, depending on the camper, how old it is, how many AC units it has in the summer, it can be almost impossible to keep it a reasonable temperature inside. If you're in direct sunlight and it gets up to like 100 degrees, trying to keep it at like 70 inside is almost impossible with one AC unit. Ours only had one. Some big campers, newer ones, have two, and maybe that's a little easier. But yeah, it can be difficult with extreme temperatures, either extreme hot or cold. The inside can get a little bit, even with space heaters and AC and everything, it can still get a little bit uncomfortable. Which
can also sometimes limit where you choose to travel. Like you may not want to go to Alaska in the winter in your RV, although there are people that do. They make all weather ones. We've heard of it, but for some people it might not work well for you to be in Alaska in the winter in an RV. A couple more cons, having to put it in storage when you're not using it.
Yeah, that's a cost to consider, is a cost and logistical situation to consider when if you're going to travel internationally or take some time off between contracts. Where are you going to leave the camper? Because for us, we had my parents, Whitney's parents, family everywhere. No one has a place that we could store a camper on their property or anything. So depending on your situation, you might not have to run into that. You might just be able to park it somewhere for free with a family member on their land. They might not care. But for us, that meant we had to find a storage facility and pay $100 a month or so to store it there while we were traveling or doing whatever.
It was even really hard sometimes, like just short stays between assignments. If it was going to be more than like 24 hours, we couldn't really just park it on the street in front of our, parents' suburban homes. In some cases, you can park it in like a Walmart parking lot, but only for 24 hours or less.
Usually less than 24 hours, yeah.
So it can be really tricky figuring out like what to do with it if you're trying to do like a quick little break between assignments or something.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last con that I wrote is just kind of the general learning curve.
Yeah. This is where things like YouTube videos are really helpful. We watched a ton of YouTube videos in the beginning to learn different things. Well, YouTube videos and forums in particular for repairs and how to set things up and things with like the sewer hoses and the electrical system and all these things that are different than a house that you might not know about. And so there is definitely a learning curve with parking, with backing, with leveling, with the sewer situation. All of these things have a learning curve, but you can get around that with YouTube. It's just, it'll take some time in the beginning.
And you just have to be willing. Like, I think the bottom line is like, you have to decide that this is a lifestyle. Like, this is something that you want to do. Don't go into it like we did, purely thinking like, oh, it's a cost benefit ratio thing. Like, you have to want to do this and want to be an RV type person who wants to figure out those problems and deal with them.
Yep.
So I want to quickly just also go through kind of like the flip side of this is like some of the pros and cons of doing short-term housing, because that's
probably go through some comments.
Yeah, we can do some comments and then we can kind of talk about that and then give you guys our summary.
We're going to go through these comments in reverse order just in case some people in the beginning have already left.
Yeah, and let us know if you have more questions or comments while we're going through this.
Yep. So Karen said, did you meet any travelers living in a Class B RV? That seems more manageable to me, easier parking, perhaps fewer repairs. Yeah, a ton. And actually, if I was a single traveler, I would have traveled in a Class B. I think that is perfect for an individual or for two people that are okay with being outdoors and living in a small space. For us, in the beginning, that really wasn't feasible. Whitney wanted a bigger camper so that she had, could bring all of her clothes and all the stuff she wanted to bring. So But if I was traveling by myself at Class B, I would 100% go that route.
Yeah, and looking back, we honestly could have done a smaller one, to be honest. Like, we really could have, but you just don't know that at the time, because if you've never dealt with tiny living, you're thinking, I need more space, but you probably don't.
Yeah. Lauren says, can you rent an RV reasonably? Renting RV, if you were going to rent it to take on an assignment, I wouldn't do that, because when you factor in the site rent, so the RV actual site where you park it, plus the cost of renting the RV, it would probably be about the same or maybe even more than short-term housing. I don't think that I would rent one to live in.
But in some cases, if someone already owns one that's parked on a lot and they're just renting that as like an Airbnb, we have seen that before.
Yeah, I would do that situation, but I would not go to a RV rental company and then take that to an RV campground, and it's going to be expensive doing that.
Yeah, and then there's also something called park model RVs, where some campgrounds, RV parks will own these park models, which is kind of like a little tiny manufactured home that's meant to just sit there. And they'll rent those out, or sometimes they'll rent out like cabins. Like some KOAs have what's called like a deluxe cabin that's kind of like a little cottage that they rent out. In some cases that can be about the same cost-wise, or maybe a little bit cheaper than renting an apartment, but usually they're furnished, which is nice.
Lauren also said that she found a cottage on Craigslist, $700 a month, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, all inclusive, and that her daughter and dog are staying with her. Yeah, that's a great situation. If you can find short-term housing for $700 a month with utilities included, that is very hard to beat. And most campgrounds are going to be somewhere in the $400 to $500 range per month with utilities included. So yeah, if you can find a short-term housing 2-bedroom, I mean, that's definitely
and Lauren, I don't know what you mean by cottage, but that's kind of what we're talking about. We stayed, one time we had to, one of our many times we had to get repairs done. We took the RV in for a week, and the KOA, or it wasn't a KOA, the campground that we were staying at also had a park model RV available for short-term rent. So we rented that for 1 week while our camper was in getting repairs done. I know we also, when we were looking into Arizona, we saw a couple that were like that, where they already had it on a lot and everything, and they just rented it month to month. So we have seen that before.
Nick said, I love the RV life. I actually didn't know that you were an RV traveler. That's awesome.
I didn't know that either, Nick.
Lena said, we're a PT pair and have 3 cats, loving RV life 6 months in. Yeah, I really think that with a pair or a couple with animals, it's a good situation to go with an RV. You just have to do your research up front.
Yep. Thanks, Lena. Okay, Haley says, super helpful advice. I'm still a first-year student, but I'm looking into travel therapy once I graduate, and I've thought about the van life, so this is great to hear.
To be honest, I've had a lot of people ask about vans. I think that's kind of the in vogue thing. I don't think that a van is worth it as a travel therapist for a few reasons. One, you still have to duplicate expenses to have a tax home, which means that you're still going to have to pay someone something to park the van. So it wouldn't be just like you could park for free, like some people think you'd be able to just park for free. And in that situation, you're going to pay the same amount for a campground for a van as you would for a small camper. So, and in addition to that, a lot of vans cost quite a bit more.
They're crazy expensive. I think it's just because they're cool. It's like, it's kind of like the Airstreams. Like the price of Airstreams has gone up just because they're cool now. Yeah. Or VW vans, like they're vintage.
So before I would travel in a van, I would look at a Class B motorhome that you can probably get for a lower cost and will have more room. Or I would look at a small tow-behind camper and a SUV to pull it with, and buy both of those used, and you could get that for probably half the cost of a van, which is kind of insane, and you'd have more room.
Mm-hmm. And they're usually built to be, because like if you do one of these van conversions, like yes, they might be built to live in with a little kitchen and stuff, but it's going to be cramped.
Yeah, one other thing is if you're a traveler in a van, you get to a campground and it's nice to set your stuff up outside and inside and have your things out. But if you're driving that to and from work every day and living in it, you couldn't really do that. It would be difficult.
You would have to think about a vehicle. You'd have to tow a small car, a bike.
I mean, you can definitely do it.
A scooter, a motorcycle.
I've known travelers that have done it, but I just don't think they come out ahead much financially or size-wise. I think it's better to go with the small camper.
We did know somebody that lived in the parking lot.
Yeah, that's true.
It's been done. Yafan says, this is really helpful. We're thinking about RVing versus short-term housing, and we're also thinking about how a child would do in each option. That's a really good point.
With a child, I think I would probably go the RV route, a used RV, just because then you have everything set up so you could have all the stuff for the kid there, like their own space. You wouldn't have to subject them to moving to a new location so much. I think that could be a little more difficult.
You can find some really good RV setups too that have what's called a bunkhouse, where they would actually have their own little area. And those are relatively the same cost a lot of times as a regular travel trailer, so it can really be done well. Jared actually knew a family that lived in an Airstream with multiple children.
Yeah, you can do it.
And to me, that would be really tight, but it's possible. It's
Depends on
doable.
your situation. We know travelers that have done it both ways with kids, but I personally think that an RV would be easier with a kid.
Yeah. I think it depends on how old your kid is and all that.
So, Michael, that was a response to Ashley, who said, thinking about camper life since traveling with a dog. Yeah, so Michael was saying, I'd make sure to have a remote thermostat that links to your phone just in case. I think that's a good idea. If you're going to have a pet inside, it is good to have some way of knowing the temperature inside, especially if you're going to be in any sort of extreme climate. And even if you don't think it's an extreme climate, even if it's only like 90 degrees or 85 degrees outside, it can get really hot inside. Even if you leave the AC on, like we always had our AC on, but you never know when there could be an electrical problem.
What about if you accidentally left and forgot to turn off the heater?
Oh, yeah.
I did that quite often, and I came back and it was like 85 degrees.
Yeah, so anyway, yeah, having some kind of thermostat in there to make sure the pet is okay while you're gone is definitely a good idea.
Megan says, yay for the sale. You guys had a terrible selling and repair experience. Yes, Megan, it was quite the ordeal. We're glad it's finally over with, and now we can talk about it.
Yeah, Elizabeth said, looked into RVs a lot. We got a 2016 open range, no problems at all. Really look at reliability stuff online of different years. Yeah, so the thing about, we thought about getting something newer, like for example, yours is probably 3 or 4 years old. We thought about that, but the issue was cost. We didn't want to save for another 3 or 6 months to get a more expensive RV, and then also knowing that the depreciation was going to be more. So there's a give and take there. A newer one is always usually going to be more reliable than an older one, but obviously costs more.
And Megan said she's listening to us while they're doing their laundry at the laundromat. Like I said, Megan and her husband are on their first assignment with their RV. Let's see. Hi, Karen. Hi, Megan. Hi, Xander. Yeah, okay, I think that was most of the ones that we got, unless we got some other ones. Let's see, we'll pick up these last couple and then we'll go into the next little bit. We're almost done.
Hey, Andrew.
Nick says, quick note, I parked in St. Louis for $735 a month. I was close to work, and now I'm in East Texas at a KOA for $300. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, St. Louis, I would imagine, since it's a city, but it's surrounded by a lot of land, it might not be as hard to find an RV site there, whereas New York City, Chicago, LA, Seattle, you're not going to be able to find RV sites around there.
Definitely Chicago, because that's the one that we looked into, and it just seemed impossible.
Yeah.
Hi, Ryan. Jordan says, I love the big RV versus tiny. Could probably park 3 or 4 vans in my RV.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's saying RV is better than a van. I definitely agree. I think for the amount that you would pay and the extra space that you have, I think it makes more sense to go with a small RV or even a bigger RV than a van that are pretty expensive.
Jordan says, I'm also paying $17.50 for a spot in San Francisco. You're paying $17.50 for an RV spot? That is why we don't go to cities.
San Francisco is expensive.
That's crazy. I didn't even know they had RV spots. I wouldn't think you'd be able to find one. What's your commute like, Jordan? I wouldn't even think they'd have them that close to San Francisco. So just the last little part I want to kind of wrap up is just sort of talking about like RVing versus short-term rentals, because we've done both. We did short-term rentals our first 6 months, and then we did it sort of in the intermediate stage. We did one contract where we did not take our RV. And then obviously from now on, we are still planning on traveling for fun and for work. So we're off work right now, but later this year in the fall, winter, we might take another contract. And from now on, we're going to have to do short-term housing. So it's obviously a lot of people choose the RV life because, Jordan said, right on the beach, 4 miles from work. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But anyway, so, there's pros and cons to both. Honestly, like, there's no perfect thing. Like, a lot of people get into RV life because they're sick of doing short-term rentals, and there's a lot of cons to short-term rentals too. But it just sort of depends on who you are, what your situation is. So kind of some of the pros of renting is, if you're a renter, you obviously don't have to worry about maintenance and repairs and stuff. You just deal with the landlord. So you don't have to worry about that. You only deal with it while you're there.
So you have no upfront costs. For people just starting out, if you can't put the money into a camper and a truck or however you decide to set up your travel situation, it might make more sense to go with short-term housing. And that's why we started with that, to save some money and not have any upfront costs.
Yeah. You obviously can probably get a larger living space in many situations, depending on if you rent a room in a house or a full apartment to yourself.
Yeah. I would say in most situations, you're going to have quite a bit more room. Obviously, if you rent a room, it's going to be cheaper, but you're sacrificing quite a bit on the living situation.
And it's just more normal in terms of like the amenities and stuff. So you're obviously not living in a campground. You're living in a more normal house, apartment, that sort of thing. So that's kind of a pro if you look at it that way. Yeah, so those are kind of the pros. So then the cons, like the challenging parts of doing short-term renting, sometimes it's very difficult to find short-term furnished places and setting up the utilities.
Yeah. We've known travelers that do a lot of different things. Some travelers will choose to rent just an unfurnished place and set up all the utilities themselves. So obviously you have a lot of hassle with like setting up water, electricity, cable, internet, all those things. And then in addition, moving all your furniture. So depending on how you do it, obviously that is cheaper than getting a furnished place. And then usually an unfurnished place is even more expensive than a campground. So you kind of have a gradient of like RV site is usually the cheapest monthly, and then an unfurnished place and a furnished place is more expensive. But yeah, it all depends on the situation then.
Yeah, and that's part of what I had listed too, is just that in a lot of cases it's more expensive. But as we talked about, like it just depends on in the long term, like your financial plan, because it might be more expensive month to month, but if you also don't have to factor in repairs and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit luck, and it's a little bit what type of rig you have. And the other thing that we hadn't talked about yet is like how long you plan to keep an RV.
Yeah, so that's a good point. When people ask me, this has been my answer for a couple years now, since having the Fifth Wheel PT site, a lot of people reach out and ask, should I travel in an RV? And always my first question is, how long do you plan to travel? Because if it's only 1 to 2 years, usually that upfront cost is not offset by the monthly rent savings. But if you travel for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you quickly get to a situation where the depreciation is offset by the monthly savings. And so financially you can come out ahead if you're planning to travel for a longer time, if you buy an RV and you keep it and you spread that depreciation over more time and the repairs and all that. So that is a big factor. If I was going to travel for just 1 or 2 years, I would go short-term housing. I would not get an RV. If I was going to travel for 3 years or more, then it really shifts my opinion towards an RV.
So we'll kind of just summarize sort of our recommendations to you. If you're watching this and you're trying to think about whether it's going to be the right choice for you or not. Again, if you guys have been watching this and if you've gotten any value out of it, we'd love if you'd give us a thumbs up. If you have any more questions before we wrap things up, please leave a comment below and ask us your questions. Even if you're watching later on the replay, feel free to ask questions. We will come back and answer the questions later. So kind of like Jared said, and like we've sort of alluded to, it's very dependent on your personal situation. Like we looked at it initially as just a like math on a piece of paper, and we only looked at the like logistics part in terms of having to move often. We did not think about the repairs. We didn't think enough about the lifestyle. Again, I don't think we would do it differently. Like I don't know that we would not have done it, but for us, after a couple of years of it, we were kind of done with it. And we've decided that from now on, for our personal lifestyle, we're going to go back to doing short-term housing. But it was a good experience. Some of the things to think about if you're thinking about doing it yourself, like Jared said, if you're going to plan to travel for probably 3+ years, it makes more sense financially. If you're not going to plan to travel for 3 or less years, then it probably doesn't financially make that much sense. But for some people, it's not all about the finances.
Yeah, it's true. And then in addition to that, if you are a couple or you have pets, it can sway it more in favor of traveling in an RV because you have your own space. It's probably cheaper. That if you're a couple, you can it's very difficult to rent a room in a house, and that's the cheapest way that most travelers travel. So as a couple, it can make a lot of sense to have an RV, especially a couple with pets, so that you don't have to pay a lot of money for short-term housing.
Yeah, and just really taking into account the lifestyle, the maintenance, the repairs. Think about the type of person that you are. Are you somebody that has experience already RVing? You already like that lifestyle. You already know you're Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It, and you know how to do all those kinds of things, and you're up for the challenge, then it might really be for you. if you were strictly trying to like do it because you thought it would make your life easier and cheaper, but you realize that you're kind of like us and you don't like to spend your weekends during your parish and you're not that knowledgeable, maybe it's not for you. Maybe you might dish out a little bit more money to do the short-term housing, but you really have to take into account the hassle and the work that you're going to have to put in to be an RV person. We've even heard people that decided to buy a new one and there were problems with it right out of the factory.
Yeah.
Buying a new one doesn't guarantee that there's not going to be problems, unfortunately.
Very true.
So there's just a lot of pros and cons to think about, and we definitely can't tell you for sure what's the right choice for you, but we hope that we've given you a lot of information to think about.
Yep.
And consider for your own situation.
Yeah, very individual decision. So just go through the pros and cons, think about what your purpose for being a traveler is, how long you plan to travel, and hopefully you can come to a good decision there.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, we enjoyed it. We don't regret it. We wouldn't have our Fifth Wheel PT blog. That was a cool part of our life. It was fun. It makes for a cool story. We'll remember it for the rest of our lives. I will say, I think we're glad. Sometimes we're sitting here and we're like, wait a minute, we don't have an RV in storage somewhere that we have to worry about. We don't have a truck that we have to worry if it's not going to start in the morning.
Yeah.
For us, it's kind of a relief to be done with it. And, now when we take our next travel assignment, we'll be with the rest of you guys trying to find short-term housing and being frustrated with Craigslist and Furnished Finder and all that crap. But you know what? I mean, it's just part of our journey and we're excited for the next stage.
Yep. All right. So thanks for joining, guys. Again, if you like this video, please like it, leave us a comment, let us know. If you have any questions or if you have any future video ideas, let us know about that as well. We do these videos every week and we will be back on Sunday evening.
All right, guys. Have a great night. Thank you for joining.
Take care.